Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 8 of the Buy Yourself Flowers project. Today we will be talking about dismantling diet culture and eating disorders among youth. We are joined by Selena Schapp, co-founder of Beyond Measure and licensed psychologist, and Sam Finkelstein, co-founder of Beyond Measure and registered dietitian nutritionist. Okay, so my first question, what made you interested in psychology or disordered eating, and why co-found your own practice?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here. That's a great question. Brief history around Beyond Measure. Our four co-founders, two psychologists and two dietitians, all worked together at sort of one of the big companies previously. And, we really, really loved working together. I think that was one of the aspects of the work that was so enjoyable. And we felt like we were an excellent team and loved the multidisciplinary aspect of the work that we did. But of course, like any big company, there's lots of sort of red tape and the ways that they want things to be done, and that didn't always align with our values. And so we decided that we thought we could build something where we could really take evidence-based practice, but apply it to the individual patients that are in front of us. And so we left and decided to start Beyond Measure. So that is sort of in a nutshell how Beyond Measure came to be.
Oh, wow. How would you define disordered eating, and how do you identify it in teenagers?
Yeah, it can be a little bit tricky to define disordered eating. We live in this diet culture, and so there are so many messages about food and bodies all around us. And unfortunately, because of those messages, so many people do engage in disordered eating, which we often think about as could be restricting our eating or engaging in exercise to control how your body looks. Or for some people, they may be engaging in disordered eating, and it may not be as much about how their body looks or about body size, but might be about sort of trying to achieve this, quote, perfect kind of definition of health, or eat in a sort of like extreme healthy way.
Mhm.
You don't have to meet criteria for an eating disorder to really be impacted by these behaviors and thoughts. And we always encourage people to seek out support as soon as they're feeling like something is off. But some of the kind of big flags are if some of the ways you're thinking about food and eating or exercise are really starting to impact. Certainly, if it's impacting you physically, impacting your physical health, but it also may first impact you emotionally, impact your relationships, your ability to live your life. I would say those are some of the kind of big flags that it's maybe time to get some support.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you guys explain the core philosophy behind Beyond Measure's approach to eating disorders, particularly its commitment to weight inclusive care and the health at every size principles?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll let Sam jump in about the health at every size, but I think, like I was saying earlier, one of our goals is to really bring evidence care and sort of the expertise that, science has really gifted us with, and then figure out how do we really apply that for the individual. So everything that we're trying to do is to take the knowledge that we know and then really, humanize it, really look at the person that's in front of us and figure out what is going to work best in this situation with all of the factors. And of course, health at every size is an important part of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so to sort of add to that and talk a little bit more about, I can give some background on what health at every size is and how we really sort of implement that and utilize it here at Beyond Measure. So, health at every size, just first for anyone who doesn't know, is it's a kind of concept that also is the title of a book. And I think it's a really helpful resource as far as kind of what we have right now. It is due for an update, and so as soon as an updated version comes out, we'll be sure to let folks know. But yeah, health at every size as a concept really means that we're doing kind of two big things. One, we're really trying to separate these concepts of health and weight, because what we do know from the evidence that we have, and certainly what we see in our kind of just clinical work with folks,
Mhm.
is that health and weight are not the same thing, that they really do exist separately, and they're not as tied together as diet culture and even kind of mainstream medicine and our culture on the whole has kind of led us to believe. So we really work on separating those things, and really work on kind of defining health in kind of this bigger picture sense. And so that kind of leads me to the second piece of how we define health at every size, which is that we really want to focus on the factors that really do impact our health and our well-being. So often what that looks like in our work with people is focusing on behaviors, patterns, thoughts, and all of those really impactful things when it comes to eating and kind of health and well-being in our bodies, rather than using weight as sort of this stand-in, where if weight is going up, that's bad. If weight is going down, that's good. Or sometimes in eating disorder treatment, I think we almost hear it like the opposite when someone is needing to maybe restore weight, like if as long as weight is going up or has gone up, everything is fine, when in reality there's often a lot to look at. And so I think that's really what's at the core of health at every size, is that we're not ever boiling someone's health down to just what the number on the scale is saying for any reason or another. It's really kind of zooming out and taking that big picture approach.
Mhm. Um, how do trauma, anxiety, perfectionism, or social media influence disordered eating in youth?
Yeah, so this is a big question. I would say it's so rare. I mean, I've been doing this work for a while, and I can probably count on one hand the amount of times that I've seen someone with sort of an eating disorder as their sole diagnosis. I think often we see comorbidities, like the ones that you've listed, certainly trauma, anxiety, depression, substance use, right? Lots of perfectionism, absolutely, and stress. So it's really, really common to have those sort of overlapping. And one of the things that we can see is sometimes eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors can really be sort of serving as like a coping tool, a way to sort of manage or control certain things, or maybe other emotional aspects like anxiety and depression that feel out of control to that individual. So it's really important, of course, to address the eating disorder, but it's also really important to make sure that whatever the eating disorder is sort of being used for, that we're building more coping skills, that we are adding in things to sort of fill that hole that we create when we start to remove the eating disorder. So it's a complex relationship, and I think it's really always important to be looking at the big picture. Again, that comes back to that idea of individualizing care and really looking at the individual in front of us and understanding what is it that they need. And that's part of the reason, we do more than just eating disorder work at Beyond Measure. A lot of these things that we're talking about, trauma, anxiety, depression, perfectionism, are also things that we treat alone, even if someone didn't have an eating disorder. And I think being able to have that knowledge is really important, because they come together so often. And we need to make sure that we really are treating all of sort of the aspects. So very important. And then maybe we can talk about social media as sort of a separate beast in and of itself. I mean, certainly the research that's coming out is showing that social media is detrimental to body image and honestly overall mental well-being. So I think that's out there. That being said, I think we all know social media isn't going anywhere. It's not likely to disappear tomorrow. So I think it's about thinking critically, how is it impacting us? And for each of us individually, what do we want to do about that? And so for the patients that Sam and I work with and everyone at Beyond Measure, we're often encouraging starting with like education, right? Just critically thinking about what you're seeing on social media, and realizing that, there's a lot of distortion in that, meaning, that could be from the distortion of just filters and, Photoshop and people editing Facetune and editing what is being out there, all the way to the distortion of the fact that people often post on social media, the best vacation or the best moment they had in that day, or the best picture out of 500 that they took in that exact same pose, which is really a distorted reality of someone's whole life. So when we look at that, it can be very it can really make us want to compare, right? Our situation, our life, our body, our eating, whatever it is, to what we're seeing. And it's really important to pause and remind ourselves that, that's really sort of an unrealistic view of somebody's life in many ways. So I think that's the first really important thing. And then I think it's important from there to kind of start to think about and really reflect on how it's making you feel as an individual. So that's one of the things I'm often working with my individual patients on is thinking, okay, when you get off of, TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is, how do you feel, right? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel sad? Do you feel good? Do you feel good about your body, about yourself? Do you feel like you need to go do something to change your body or eating, right? What is the sort of way that it is impacting you? And that often is a really good marker of, okay, might we need to do some things differently? And that can look like reducing time on social media. That can look like taking a social media break just to get a breather and kind of see how it feels for you.
Mhm.
And that can look like kind of cleaning up your social media. Maybe, who are the people that you're following or the accounts you're following that you're realizing, you know what, this messaging isn't making me feel good and I want to unfollow these folks. And then similarly, there are certainly people out there that are putting, just like wonderful body positive, food positive messages out there. So how could we make sure that we're following those folks as well? So I think it's a complicated interaction with the social media world, but it definitely is impactful.
Thank you so much for that answer. You mentioned that sometimes eating disorders can sort of be used as a coping mechanism in like larger, more intricate situation. Like what type of coping mechanisms do you sometimes recommend to fill that hole, like after they started working on it?
Yeah, such a good question. I think, again, like you're alluding to, it sort of depends on maybe what they're needing coping skills for. And of
Mhm.
course, if there are like specific issues around like something diagnosable, like depression or anxiety or trauma, we would want folks to get support for those individual things and make sure that they're getting the coping skills that really, map onto that. But in general, of course, there are some like really good things that we can think about doing. Certainly, sort of things that are in sort of what I would say is kind of like our mindfulness realm. So, things like mindfulness practices, meditation practices, all the way just to like deep breathing practices. So, really working on sort of being able to relax our body and our minds can be incredibly impactful. And that can kind of extend all the way to different like grounding practices, things that maybe like when we're feeling really stressed or maybe we're being triggered by something related to a trauma that we experienced. Often that sort of makes our emotions flare. It makes us feel like we're sort of maybe stepping away from reality. It can make us feel very sort of heightened and out of control. And often what we need to do is sort of ground ourselves, our body and our mind back to the present moment to help ourselves realize that, that trauma isn't happening right now, that, we will survive this stressor or whatever is coming up. And so that can certainly be things that like map onto your senses, right? So kind of what are different things that you can see? What are things you can hear, things you can smell, things you can touch, right? Things that help you physically ground back into the moment.
Mhm.
So that's a very brief overview of obviously like a huge batch of coping skills, which
Yeah.
again, I would say is in sort of our like relaxation and mindfulness. And
Mhm.
I would say another really big batch that we talk about, and again, I'm kind of doing generalities here, but would be sort of our cognitive coping skills. So a lot of times, our thoughts are incredibly powerful, but the interesting thing about the way we think is that they're not facts, right? Our thoughts could be influenced by so many things, our own experiences, messaging that we've gotten from different places, just like we were talking about diet culture messages earlier.
Mhm.
Um, all of these things. And so those thoughts impact how we feel and then how we behave. And so it can be very, very impactful to start to take a look at what are your thinking patterns. When you're feeling really anxious and nervous, what kind of thoughts are coming up? Often we notice there maybe worst case scenario thoughts. Everything is
Mhm.
going to be, horrible or not work out. I'll never be able to do this or that thing, right? There's sort of these all or nothing type thinkings. And so it can be really helpful to start to notice those patterns and to start to figure out out how do we challenge those thoughts? How do we bring thoughts in that are one, certainly more like realistic? So really trying to bring in some facts. Like what do we actually know? What can we actually say here as a true fact versus things that we actually don't know or can't know? And then the other one is thoughts that are more helpful, right? Things that are sort of these coping thoughts that continue to, empower us and help us to move forward. So those are just a few to give examples of some different buckets that will often be like working in.
Hmm. Can you guys think of any maybe misconceptions about eating disorders?
Yes, we absolutely can. There are a lot of them out there.
Hmm.
I think the first one that comes to mind is the idea that eating disorders have like a look.
Hmm.
Um, the truth is, eating disorders can impact anyone in any size body, including restrictive eating disorders. So I know we often hear people feel that someone can't have an eating disorder because maybe they're in a larger body,
Hmm.
and or that if someone is in a larger body and they say they have an eating disorder, there might be assumptions that are made about what that eating disorder looks like, or that it can't be restrictive.
Hmm.
When in reality, yeah, those restrictive eating disorders impact people across the size spectrum.
Hmm.
I think sort of related to that, I think another kind of pervasive myth is sort of the idea that like the severity of an eating disorder is correlated with the size of somebody's body. So that like if somebody is in a larger body or is sort of in like a quote average size body, that maybe their eating disorder is not that severe. That eating disorders are not severe unless someone is like classified as underweight, or looks incredibly thin. And the reality is, again, eating disorders impact people across the size spectrum,
Hmm.
and severity can really happen across the size spectrum. Not only that, but medical instability and all of that is not necessarily inherently related to the size of somebody's body. But also just a little plug, that most people with eating disorders are actually medically stable too. So even if someone listening to this and thinking, oh, I've been told I have an eating disorder, but I went to the doctor and the doctor said everything looked okay,
Hmm.
that doesn't inherently mean that everything is actually okay, right? Kind of goes back to what we were talking about with a health at every size approach, where we really want to look at that big picture. And so, again, if your eating is impacting your relationships, your emotions, your ability to kind of live your life, that really is can be something just as severe as something that is medically concerning. Plus, with eating disorders, things can become medically concerning really at any point. And so sometimes we're kind of teetering and things look okay, but could change at any time. So I think that's another myth. And I think the last one I'll mention is just the idea or perception that eating disorders maybe only kind of impact like thin, affluent white girls and women. And in reality, again, eating disorders impact everybody. They really do not discriminate, just like diet culture does not discriminate. Diet culture may come at folks in different groups sort of from different angles. And I feel like we used to say some groups may be impacted more than others, but I think the more we're around and do this work, the more I think no one kind of gets out unscathed. Really, everybody is so impacted. So I think that's another big one.
Leading off of that answer, how do you approach intuitive eating with the teenager that has been entrenched in diet culture?
Yeah, such a good question. Certainly, it often starts with identifying the diet culture that's around us. Like we've been talking about today, it's everywhere. We're
Mhm.
swimming in it constantly, and so the messages are coming from all over, and they're not just from like social media or things like that. They can come from, your doctor. They can come from coaches. They can come from your family of origin, like your, parents and the messaging that you got around food and bodies. And so these are important things to start to identify and question, but they can also be challenging to question, especially if it's something that's very entrenched, right? You've been thinking it, since you were like almost like born, right? It sort of feels like this is just the message that came along with everything. And that also kind of helps us identify that like internalized diet culture, right? The ways that people have really taken that in and the things that they're like saying to themselves and putting that pressure on themselves. And then, in line, I guess, or in conjunction with that, I would say, then we're often making changes to really work on eating enough. And that's obviously where our wonderful dietitians come in and really help folks kind of step away from diet culture and sort of understand what really is enough for their body and how do we want to be thinking about food in sort of a neutral way that allows us to fuel our bodies. And certainly enjoy food is a wonderful aspect of it. But, at the end of the day, the number one goal is making sure we get enough, right? So that our body is doing well and that it's not the eating disorder that's sort of in charge of what we're eating, but really that our body is in charge of what we're eating. And
Mhm.
that can take a little bit of time to get back to a space, of course, where we can trust our body. Intuitive eating is really our end goal. So if someone's coming to us with disordered eating patterns or an eating disorder, we're not like starting with intuitive eating out the gate, because often things have kind of gone off track, right? And so we're going to need sort of some tools to get that back on track, that support, especially like from our dietitians to kind of understand what eating does need to look like and be able to really trust your body again. And honestly, for your body to trust you and be able to give you the cues that it needs. And so we're kind of moving back towards intuitive eating. I would say that's always our end goal is that folks can really trust their body and understand how to eat intuitively again, sort of like how we all started. Babies are very good intuitive eaters. They really can like trust their body. They know what they need. They make it clear to us when they need it. And sometimes that's going to ebb and flow, and that's really what we want people to understand. So again, end goal of recovery is intuitive eating, and really working with sort of a treatment team, including a full treatment team. So you've got your therapist, your dietitian, and medical provider. Those are often sort of really crucial. Sometimes folks have even other treatment providers, like a psychiatrist or somebody like that, that is also supporting them. So it's really important to kind of have your full team in order to take the steps you need to get all of that back on track.
Do you most often see eating disorders show up in teenagers, or have you also seen it show up earlier on, maybe undiagnosed or maybe diagnosed, like in middle school or in elementary school?
Such a good question. Yes. So in the time that I've been doing this work now, I would say the sad news to share is that I think eating disorders are showing up younger and younger. At the very least, disordered beliefs about bodies and food are certainly showing up younger. And then with that, we are seeing a younger, full-blown diagnosis of eating disorder as well.
Mhm.
So I do think that is. I mean, it's probably for many reasons, but certainly one is sort of the diet culture messages and how strong they are that are out there. And there are definitely research studies that have looked at as young as really elementary school children. So we're talking about pretty young, kids start elementary school, kindergarten, somewhere around 6 or 7 years old.
Mhm.
So very young kids, just looking at body sort of thoughts, like thinking, maybe that they're fat or that there's something wrong with their body or they're overweight, right? Things like that. Those thoughts are coming up in a very large portion, like over half of already elementary school age children. So this idea that we really need to start, working through this health at every size lens, really challenging the diet culture messages and the way that we're sending them, and helping people have a healthy relationship with food and bodies. Their body is, I mean, the evidence is there that we need to really be doing this work. So, to, I guess, summarize and answer your question, yes, unfortunately, we are seeing it younger and younger. I would still say, like, the biggest cohorts are teenagers, so like high school age and college age, I would say is probably our biggest still cohorts of like a start of an eating disorder. But unfortunately, we are seeing it start younger.
What advice do you give caregivers who want to support their child or teen without unintentionally reinforcing diet culture?
Yeah, well, first I would just want to really like let any caregivers who are listening know that this part can be such a challenge. I
Mhm.
know many of the families who come to us, of course, most, if not all, of those parents are just there to support their child, right? And really want them to get all of the care that they need and want to support the process however they can. And I know often caregivers will end up feeling a lot of feelings when they, when certain things are pointed out or when they realize that they may have somehow contributed to some of like the diet culture messaging. And so we always like to let caregivers know, like, yeah, of course that happened, right? Not because there's anything like really all that unique about like an individual household, but just because again we're all swimming in diet culture, we're all impacted by it. It's part of sort of the fabric of how we talk as a society, and so I would say most parents or caregivers who are like coming into treatment with their child, are starting in a place where they probably are doing some of the things that we would recommend against. And so some of those things are like labeling foods as good or bad, or like healthy or unhealthy, or using other kind of euphemisms to sort of categorize foods. And that's one of the first things that we really recommend families try to steer away from. And I always like to let parents know this is going to take some practice. And so, it's okay. We don't have to do it perfectly, but really trying to start to make that change, where we're talking about food sort of in this neutral way. And then I would say the other big change that we really recommend is coming away from talking about bodies in general. Certainly avoiding critical talk of bodies, whether that's avoiding critical talk of your child or your teen's body. Certainly also not making critical comments about other people's bodies, and then really the big one is not making those comments about your own body, which can often be, a really big change for people. And so one thing that can also come up for caregivers is starting to notice their own challenges with making some of these changes. And so we always want to, support caregivers in getting some of their own support, whether it would be helpful to see a therapist, even just to talk about like the challenges of, supporting a teen through eating disorder recovery, but also to kind of process any of your own challenges with your own body image or with food, or meeting with your own dietitian to sort of address any challenges with your eating. So I think those are some of the big ways that we really try to guide parents to offer some good support.
Mhm. That makes sense. And finally, what advice do you guys have to teenagers who might be struggling with disordered eating or have friends that struggle with disordered eating?
Yeah, so hopefully with everything we've talked about today, we've made it clear like this is really so common. Even if someone's not, having a diagnosed eating disorder, having disordered behaviors or even disordered thoughts or negative thoughts about your body or food or your relationship with your body or food is really common. Again, because of sort of the society we live in and the diet culture messages. So similar to what Sam was just recommending for caregivers, we really often recommend to teens starting to reflect on some of these ideas and biases that you may have, and changing some of that messaging that you have coming in. We talked earlier, right? That could be about like tuning into your social media feed and starting to like unfollow certain accounts that send you those diet culture messages,
Mhm.
and following more helpful accounts that maybe are sending messages that make you feel more like food neutrality, make you feel like, body neutrality or positivity. Obviously, you're welcome to follow our account, Beyond Measure SFA.
Mhm.
But there are many out there. There are a lot of people that are doing wonderful work to try to sort of counteract these diet culture messages. And that can also extend to, again, that social support. I know you were asking me earlier about other coping tools, and we didn't even dive into social support, but it can be so useful to work as sort of, with your friends as sort of a team, if you will, to kind of say, hey, we don't want diet culture and basically all of these like multi-billion dollar companies to be the ones in charge of how we relate to food in our bodies anymore. So we are going to kind of work together to make these similar kind of pacts, like we were just talking about with, excuse me, with parents, to say things like, we're not going to talk negatively about our bodies, right? We're lifting each other up. We're not going to be, kind of Yeah, like criticizing certainly each other, but even our own bodies, right? We're going to kind of call each other out in a, of course, gentle and supportive way, but kind of be like, let's not do that anymore, right? Let's build this positive space and relationship with our bodies. The goal is not to, look one certain way. Each of us has our own unique body, and let's celebrate that idea and body diversity and really support each other. And similarly with food, right? Let's bring food neutrality into it. We're not going to say some things like, unhealthy or I'm trying not to eat that, right? We're going to start to create a different environment. So
Mhm.
that social support and like your group of friends can be incredibly powerful. And this is really an individual issue, it's a societal issue. Ultimately, it's also a social justice issue, being able to respect everyone's individual body. And like Sam was saying earlier, eating disorders do not discriminate. They are impacting everybody. And it's really important for us to be kind of spreading these messages. And then, of course, finally, similar to with parents, if you are really struggling and you're feeling like I need that individualized support, it is starting to really impact my mental health, my physical health, of course, my relationships, right? My abilities at school to do things, then it's really time to kind of reach out and make sure that you're getting that support you need. So, working with a treatment team, a therapist, a dietitian that can help guide you through the process and give you maybe that additional support that you need to navigate sort of these really tricky situations, which honestly, they are very tricky to challenge these thoughts again, because it really is everywhere. So I think there are a lot of things that we can all do to create a culture that can be different. And for individuals that are really struggling, making sure you're getting that individualized support.
Mhm.
Mhm. Thank you so much for all of your guys' insights today, and I'm sure that this will be super educational for everyone who's listening in. And thank you so much for your time too.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been awesome to be here. Sounds
Excellent. Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.